Welcome back, everyone. We're going to move on now to the portion of the program with our panel members being the NCBA, RCAF, and the U.S. Cattlemen's Association. The spoken goal of this program is the need for unity in the cattle industry, and I do believe that remains our goal from today. If I can ask with a show of hands, how many of you listen to the radio? Looks like everybody does. How many of you listen to 5 channels at one time? 2? You listen to 1. Why do you listen to 1? Because you can hear what it's saying, right? If you tune into 2 or 3 at a time, it gets to be a lot of noise and a lot of words. We need unity. We need one message. And that's the goal of what we're doing here today, is to try to come at this from one perspective so that we're all supporting one another for the betterment of the cattle industry. And I very much appreciate these folks being able to spend their time with us and help move us that direction. We would ask for an introduction of yourselves and whom you're with, and we'll start with you, Justin.
Thank you, Clay, and thank you guys all for being here. I think this is a great conversation to have. I'm Justin Tupper, Vice President of U.S. Cattlemen's Association. I also run St. Ange Livestock in St. Ange, South Dakota. I think the conversation about unity in the cattle industry is one that we have to have. When you look at the ag industry itself only being about 2% of the population, then when you segment that down to cattle business, and then you segment it into 3 different groups giving 3 different topics or tearing each other apart, our voice gets pretty small. So I think the need for unity is huge. I was fortunate enough to go to Phoenix when all these groups met in Phoenix along with Farm Bureau and Farmers Union, and one of the things I thought was huge there was we talked about the need for being cattlemen first and cattle groups second. And I hope that continues here today. So it's my pleasure to be here. Justin Tupper, Vice President of the U.S. Cattlemen's Association.
And good morning. Thanks for being here. I'm glad to see so many faces, both friends, neighbors, and people that even I disagree with on occasion. My name's Larry Stomprude. My son and I run a modest cow-calf operation near Mud Butte. We've been on that place for 113 years now. So the cow business is nothing new to us. I'm a former president of the South Dakota Cattlemen's Association and a member of the NCBA. NCBA advocates for its members on a wide range of issues that impact our industry. And our members come from all 50 states, all sectors of the industry, but the majority of them are cow-calf operators like myself. Every member in the organization has a voice in the direction of our association. The issues we lobby on are decided at our annual convention, which is meeting as we speak in Houston. And the key point here is that the NCBA does not stray from the direction that our members tell us to go on the issues that are important to them. The advocacy that happens in Washington is separate from our advocacy through the Checkoff. Make no mistake, the dollars that are spent in the Checkoff are separate from, and there's a firewall so that no Checkoff dollars are spent on policy on issues that we advocate. Oh, that's short. The members make it possible for us to support our grassroots members and the strength of our relationship with the policymakers, including the congressional delegation that was represented here today. And we have a real good relationship with them. Throughout the industry, throughout our history, our goals have remained the same: to improve the business climate of our producers, protect our family ranches and farms, and preserve our way of life.
My name is Karina Jones, and my husband and I ranch down in central Nebraska by Broken Bow on the edge of the Sandhills. Growing up, I knew what I wanted to do, and that was raise kids and cattle, because that's all I ever saw anybody else in my family do. And so I was fortunate enough to, be able to go out and live that life. But at some point, the view just isn't enough. At some point, you have to get profitable. And that's when I really started to leaning into what was going on in the cattle industry, and that's when I found RCAF and started becoming involved in policy as a member and being vocal and speaking out on behalf of cattle producers. And I guess after a while, they, as Brett Kinsey says, they drafted me onto staff to go around and to talk at these things, and now I'm the field director for RCAF. RCAF is the largest cattle producer-only organization in the nation. We only represent the cattle producer side of the beef supply chain. We stay aggressively engaged in all three branches of government, probably most notably in the judicial branch of government. Our goal is to make us as cattle producers profitable. Those are the reforms we fight for, and we are guided by our membership every year. And if you look in your Vitalix bag, you have a cattle industry long-range plan, and this is what guides us. And so you can feel free to take that out, flip through it, and I'll talk about some more things in there here shortly.
Okay, once again, we have questions for our panel that were prepared largely on concerns that were presented to their organizations, and they in turn handed them over to a panel of folks here that selected those questions. So if you have questions or discussions you'd like to have later on, please do so. There will be no questions from the floor, but all three of these folks will be able for private discussions later on. On November 17th of 2021, all three organizations represented supported the suspension of imported beef from Brazil due to reports of BSC or mad cow disease. There were concerns given Brazil's historical lack of cooperation and questionable trading practices in the global marketplace. Please update us on this issue and give us your organization's current stance.
It was exciting to see all three organizations put in letters to Washington requesting the suspension of Brazilian beef imports. RCAF we requested the suspension of both fresh and frozen beef imports. From this wave of attention that the Brazilian beef issue got, Senator Tester introduced some legislation, Senate Bill 3230, which would suspend the imports of Brazilian beef. As well, Congresswoman Rosa DeLaura wrote a letter urging Vilsack to exercise his authority to immediately suspend the imports of Brazilian beef. And all three organizations wrote a letter also requesting that Vilsack execute his authority. And what did we get? A USDA that denied it. Said, we never saw any suspension of Brazilian beef. And so as we take this as a lesson of the power that USDA has that they continue to not use on behalf of the American cattle industry, it becomes very concerning of who the USDA works for in Washington. Do they work for the ag producers out here in the States, out here at the grassroots level, or are they taking orders from somewhere else in the beef supply chain?
This issue is one that fortunately we can see some unity in. We're responding to Brazil's systemic approach to not playing by the rules. Every time they've been given a chance, they screw it up. And NCBA has a demonstrated history of calling them out on these things. We were the first organization to raise concerns over their failure in 2021. We made a public statement in September and followed that up with a formal letter in November. And after reviewing the case from the World Organization of Animal Health. We led an extensive fight in 2016 during Brazil's history of foot and mouth disease. and food safety concerns. We worked with and closely monitored their imports and worked with USDA to suspend their imports when they had some real problems with spoiled meat that was imported into the state. And we protested their re-entry in 2020. Brazil has some real serious credibility issues and should not be allowed to import meat to U.S. Until they get those corrected. And we support Senator Tester's bill, although it appears that bill doesn't have a great deal of chance of passing, but Senator Vilsack holds the cards on this one.
Yeah, thank you. It is nice to start a topic on one we all agree on. That's fun, isn't it? So first and foremost, just like has been said, Brazil is a bad actor. They've been caught bribing meat inspectors to get tainted meat. There's no question that we have to stay on top of that. And we were also very disappointed with U.S. Cattlemen that USDA did not suspend the imports of beef from Brazil. So as that has not happened, we've got to continue to stay on our Congress people and push them forward to make sure we can keep a safe and product within the United States. U.S. Cattlemen is working with Senator Schatz from Hawaii on a bill that's called the Forest Act. The Forest Act would prevent any product from being imported into the United States that results in deforestation of the Brazilian rainforest. So there are other avenues that we're going to try to take when we can't get USDA to do the things we have to do. We're going to work in ways to make sure we can get this to happen. So if we can't get USDA to stop them, we're going to find other ways to do it. And if that's one of the avenues we can do, we'll have to. But they're definitely a proven bad actor, and we cannot let them taint our good reputation as one of the safest proteins in the world is beef. So we've got to stay on top of that, and USCA is all about it.
Wow, an auctioneer can fit a lot of words into a short time frame, Justin. Question 2. Senate Bill 949 establishes that a minimum of 50% of a covered packer's weekly volume of livestock slaughter must be purchased through spot market sales from non-affiliated producers. What is your organization's commitment to fighting for increased competition and market transparency in the fat cattle market?
If you've been following this, you realize that this is a very complex issue. Cow-calf operators, stockers, and feeders all deserve good price discovery to ensure fair prices. And in recent years, the percentage of negotiated sales has made it more difficult to get good price discoveries, particularly in the southern plains. You may have heard that our voluntary efforts to increase this price discovery and the trip triggers, it's a complicated system, but it seems to be having some effect to the positive. We actually saw more negotiated trade after we implemented this. And as an industry, we've made good progress, but we have still a lot of room for improvement. Right now, as I said, the NCBA is having their annual meeting in Houston, and this issue is probably highest on the list of any of the issues. And they'll be addressing ways to make improvements in the program. And I and you should look forward to what comes out of the meeting this week. But price discovery isn't the only thing that is affecting our bottom line. We've supported efforts to improve market transparency by successfully advocating Representative Johnson's cattle contract bill and hope for its passage in the Senate. New USDA reports that provide more insight to the formula transactions, and the reauthorization of the livestock marketing, mandatory marketing. We've worked with the administration to secure $1 billion to expand packing capacity, and that seems to be the biggest bottleneck right now for not seeing a better price for our fat cattle. We also have been involved in labor reforms to help us keep those packing plants operating. Labor is a problem for everybody, including the packers. Finally, NCBA was the first to call for the DOG investigation, and we continue to look forward to seeing some results of that. We're vocal in our robust oversight of the beef processing sector. We can't repeal the law of supply and demand, and the market.
Thank you. This 5014 is a bill that U.S. Cattlemen supported from the beginning. We would love to see 5014. The co-sponsor of the bill, Senator Grassley, looked around the Senate and found out this is not a bill that can pass. As much as we would like to pass some of these bills, and we believe they're correct, they've got to pass through Congress. We heard those people talk in front of us. And if you can't get them passed, then we're spinning our wheels a lot of times trying to get something done. So out of that, Senator Fisher's compromise bill, co-sponsored by Senator Grassley, came up, which I think has a lot of good things in it. It establishes a minimum, and I want to emphasize a minimum negotiated cash standard in the regions. Right now, about 50% of the cattle sold in Iowa and Minnesota are sold cash, and they're bearing the brunt of establishing a cash price for the rest of the industry. We're not against AMAs. We believe they have to be a part of the equation. One thing that the opponents, some of them up here, have talked about is that the bill is not enough or it establishes regionalization. Well, we are already regionalized. The markets are regionalized. There's differences in what percentage of cash is sold. There's a Texas A&M study that came out today, that says Texas will be zero negotiated cash by 2026. We don't have time to wait, ladies and gentlemen. The Fisher compromise bill is a good start, and it sets a floor of where we need to go. It's not going to get everything we need. There's no such thing in Congress as a silver bullet bill to fix all the problems we have in the cattle industry. It's been broken over a lot of years. It's going to take a lot of time to fix. But if we don't take the reins and get something when we've had all the limelight shed on us in this time, then we've lost. And I think the time is now. I don't think the Fisher-Grassley compromise is perfect. It does not have everything we need, but it has 17 co-sponsors on both sides of the aisle. It has over half of the Senate Ag Committee. We can get this passed. That's historic. We haven't been able to move Congress in that way in forever. And in this day and age, I think we've got to get it done. So for those reasons, the U.S. Cattlemen Association has definitely been behind the compromise bill, and we continue, and we know we're going to have to continue to work. And once we get that passed, that's not the ending point. That's just a start where we got to continue to keep working. So we hope everybody can get behind, and we can get these groups behind the Fisher-Grassley compromise. Karina?
There's an old Aaron Tippin song that says you've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. And so RCAF is committed, as the question asks, what is your group committed to standing for on this issue? RCAF is committed to standing for a minimum standard of conduct that all 24 of the big four plants have to live by, have to do business by. And so as Justin talks about the compromise bill, it would be historic because it would actually exclude 9 of the 24 big four plants. It would exclude 5 of JBS's plants. Hiram, Utah, they wouldn't have a minimum put on them. The Tyson plant out in Pasco, Washington, that has been entangled in the Easter Day drama, they wouldn't have a minimum put on them. So you're right, it would be historic. It would historically damage what we are working for in RCAF to create a minimum standard of conduct from coast to coast from border to border among all 24 plants. The problem with 5014 was its beauty and its simplicity. And what Washington couldn't stand, what lobbyists couldn't stand, was common cattle producers like you and I writing legislation that was easy to understand. 50% slaughtered in 14 days. And so it quickly gained ground, had 10 co-sponsors in the Senate. And so what does Washington do when something is getting hot and close? They got to create a diversion. And that's what the compromise bill did, is it creates a diversion. Why would we empower the USDA to further study these regions and to empower USDA to create regional minimums? USDA doesn't have the power to set laws. You and I elect our lawmakers. It is Congress that is to set laws, not USDA. We just talked about how USDA punted on the Brazilian beef issue, and now we want to hand them our cattle market? That's crazy. 5014 draws a line. Our lawmakers create laws for agencies to enforce. And so right now is to show courage in this country and say we're not going to stand for lobbyists and international corporate packing conglomerates to govern our cattle industry in our markets. And so also, RCAF is also known in the arena of antitrust for our historic lawsuit, our antitrust lawsuit against the Big Four packers. We're very excited that lawsuit is currently in discovery, and I think we're all about to learn a lot more about the conduct of these packers doing business in the future.
Still there? The Beef Checkoff program was established as part of the 1985 Farm Bill. Under the program, producers pay $1 per head assessment on the animals they market. What is your organization's position on the beef checkoff reform? Justin, we'll start with you.
First and foremost, I have to say that I've served on the South Dakota Beef Industry Council for over 15 years. And your dollar, 50 cents of that goes to the South Dakota Beef Industry Council. And when I first got on that 15 or so years ago, I believed that it needed some fixing then. I can tell you the 50 cents spent in South Dakota, because I get to help spend that money along with 8 other organizations, is well used. The 50 cents that goes to national may need some reform. USCA's stance, we support periodic reforms. USCA understands that we need to modernize the beef checkoff. We believe there's definitely things that need to be done. They've done some good things. When the mad cow in Canada came along, we're prepared to defend that. There are things that we need in that. Does the checkoff have problems? Without question. Do we think we need to take it all away? That's not necessarily what we believe. We think we can modernize the act. We can make it a little more streamlined, a little more user-friendly. We can separate the federation. I think that's something that we believe would be very helpful. We also believe that one of the changes that could help is allow the CBB to contract directly with vendors. Right now, the U.S. Cattlemen's Association is a contractor. We've been there 2 different times and worked on different research projects to try to understand better of how that checkoff dollar is spent and worked. And it's tough. It needs some redoing. It is not the be-all, end-all program, I'll guarantee you, or the biggest problem we have with our cattle industry. But it does need some reforms, and USCA supports periodic reforms of the beef checkoff.
Thank you. RCAF is the only organization sitting before you that does not accept any beef checkoff money. We never have, and I don't foresee that we ever will, because that is policy guided by our members. And so how many of you, just a show of hands, how many of you actually voted in 1985? I don't even know if we're at 10% of this crowd. I didn't either. And so the Beef Promotion Act, in order of 1985, actually says that we are supposed to have periodic referendums. Once again, guided by in the hands of the USDA, who can grant or deny those referendums. And so you and I have not been granted a referendum in 37 years to recheck the accountability of this program. In fact, we don't know if we'll ever get a referendum. So let's talk about what else has happened since 1985. Since 1985, per capita consumption of beef has fallen 20 pounds per person in this country. And a lot of these facts are exactly kind of what Dr. Sides was talking about earlier this morning. 1985, cattle producers like you and I were receiving 57% of the consumer dollar. Today, it's around 37%. We've lost nearly 20% of the consumer dollar as well since the beef checkoff has been made mandatory. In 1985, there were 110 million cows in this country. Today, 93 million, 93 and a half. So where is the checkoff winning? We're losing our cow herd, we're losing producers, we're losing a percentage of the consumer dollar, and we're losing per capita consumption of beef. Something's got to be done. There are a few things happening. RCAF has 2 lawsuits in the courts right now. One of them, filed in the District Court of Columbia, is actually going on to discovery.
Let's be clear, the detractors of the checkoff do not want to reform it. They want to dismantle it. Foremost among these is PETA and HSUS and those organizations that are in partnership with them. The beef checkoff is the strongest tool we have with the cattle producers have to defend their industry. From environmental justice activists to animal rights groups to fake meat companies. These organizations are spending millions and millions of dollars to put us out of business. And with regard to NCBA, let's be clear, not a single penny of your checkoff dollars goes to policy part of the NCBA. We work as the largest contractor to the beef checkoff, agreed, but we do some great work. The checkoff funding does support important research and consumer-focused programs in Washington, D.C. And it does support some consumer programs that drive consumer demand for beef and protects our reputation. Dr. Sides talked about dietary guidelines, and NCBA through the checkoff program provided 22 different technical comments friendly to beef consumption. And I might mention that contractors are paid in arrears, so you don't get the money up front. You have to do the work, has to be audited before it can be paid.
Getting a little competition from over here, some kids being introduced to animal agriculture, so I'll ask you guys to probably lean a little closer to the microphone so the folks in the crowd can hear you a bit. 2-part question for number 4. What is your organization's policy on beef labeling, mandatory versus voluntary? And part 2, the USDA has indicated that implementing a trade-compliant MCOOL program would cost the U.S. beef industry $8 billion in the first 10 years and an additional $7.96 billion for consumers during that same time. What is your organization's position on these costs versus the benefits to the livestock producer?
RCAF has always made it clear where they stand on country of origin labeling. It needs to be mandatory. We had it for a short period of time, and you and I all know what our cash flows looked during those years of 2014 and 15, right? Well, even the USDA data reflects it, because the cattle industry is the largest single commodity industry in this country. And when we lost MCOOL, we lost $20 billion a year in cattle receipts, and that's USDA data. That was money taken out of Belle Fourche, out of Lusk, Wyoming, Crawford, Nebraska, out of our rural communities, and that is money that we deserve to have. Mandatory country of origin labeling is the only way that we can let the consumer support us with their dollar. This is going to be the fairest way to return that consumer percentage of dollar back to the American cattle producer by creating demand for American-born, raised, and harvested cattle. Now, there is another labeling issue at hand, and that's the product of USA label. Just as the legislative panel talked about, the product of USA label is a voluntary label. It will always remain voluntary under the USDA's purview, so we can see how that's going. Everybody is volunteering not to use the label. That is why we remain steadfast to the American Beef Labeling Act, Senate Bill 2716. As they talked in the legislative panel, we continue to gain momentum, bringing on bipartisan pairs of senators, and I think that we will soon have that bill introduced in the House, as we're actively gaining some House members that are interested in introducing that.
This issue is probably the most contentious among the three organizations you see sitting here, but let me try and explain to you what our position is. NCBA supports voluntary origin labels only if they're source verified, if they're audited. We support product differentiation in the marketplace. The main difference is that most producers believe that we can do a better job of marketing our product than the government can. We should be empowered to differentiate our beef in the marketplace with claims like origin. Unfortunately, as Karina said, this product of the U.S. is very misleading, and that's something we do agree on, that needs to be reformed or eliminated. But we don't need a government-run label to compete with our product. We do not support the American Beef Labeling Act because it will restore cool and resort in triggering $1 billion in retaliatory tariffs from Mexico and Canada. USDA had a 2015 study that affirmed producer concerns that MCOOL has way more downside than benefits, and I can provide some of that information to you later on. There's been statements, and Mark referred to this earlier, that it's possible to make MCOOL compliant, trade compliant, but so far no solutions have been offered to actually do that. Make no mistake, Canada and Mexico haven't backed off, and if we reinstate cool, we'll be hit with those mandatory tariffs. Our problem now, our biggest problem is packing capacity. If we implemented cool, that would slow down the chain and actually be counterproductive to what we want to do at this point in time.
Yeah, this issue is one we probably don't agree on, all of us. That's a fact. Leo McDonald, one of our founding members of the U.S. Cattlemen Association, was one of the original proponents of mandatory country of origin labeling. Now, unfortunately, the WTO tore it down, and we're going to have to find ways around that if we want to bring it back. The product of the USA label needs to truly be that, product of the USA. And today it is not. You cannot go to the grocery store and assure yourself that came from a product of the USA. And we should be able to differentiate that, and the cost of that should be on our foreign competitors that are bringing beef in here. We should not saddle our U.S. producers with that cost. We should be able to differentiate that, because they should have to label their beef that it's a product of somewhere other than the United States. I think we have to listen to the consumers. I think in this day and age, the consumer more than ever wants to know where their food comes from. I think that's a huge thing. And as beef prices continue to climb, whether we like it or not, to keep our market share, we're going to have to do the things that the consumer wants us to do. And I think making sure that we can serve them a product that they want to buy, and it can be sourced from product of the USA, and they can confidently find that, is a very, very important thing. We do have some definite challenges with the WTO ruling that came down when we lost. Cool. But I think there are definitely ways we can work with Congress to get that back in there. So we definitely support Senator Thune's bill. We want to take away those loopholes for the big four packers to be able to label something as product of the USA just by changing the packaging. That should never happen, and we definitely have got to get that changed. So with that, we definitely support mandatory labeling of our beef, as long as we can make sure that it fits the WTO rule for our trade partners. But when we do it, let's put the onus on those cheaper cuts of beef that are coming in from out of the country, and not do it to our producers, is one way we believe we can do it. So with that.
Our independent livestock producers and ranchers don't know what is going on in Washington, D.C. What are your organization's legislative priorities and goals? How can we protect ourselves, our livestock, our profits, and our livelihoods from the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C.?
First of all, I take exception to that statement that livestock producers and ranchers don't know what's going on in Washington. Our NCBA staff is engaged every day with the administration, with Congress, and they're working for you whether you're a member or not. Through emails, social media, news releases, that information is available to all, and it only takes desire and willingness to look for it. I'd like to circle back on one thing from that last that I didn't get a chance to talk to. I've wondered for a long time how big a problem this labeling is, and I found out 11% of our meat coming in that consumed in the U.S. is imported meat. 73% of that is lean trim. You do the math, that's 3% of our meat is muscle cut. So it's probably not as big a problem that has initially appeared. Now I'll get back to this question. NCBA's top concern is producer profitability and making sure that cattle operations are successful in years to come. This means fighting back against tax increases that would threaten your livelihood and keep you from passing that ranch farm on to your predecessor or your successors. WOTUS is a big problem, and we're fighting that along with our congressional delegation, and they talked some about that. We're continuing to work and expand on the tax wins that we've had in recent months. We fought back against the step-up in basis. We've continued to fight for repeal of the estate tax. Maybe someday that'll happen. And we've preserved in the tax bill that President Biden proposed, the 1031 exchange. When the House passed the Build Back Better Act in November, NCBA helped stop that bill from being paid on the backs of our producers. We're pushing back on endangered species rules that unfairly protect the predators and fails to delist endangered species, recovered species. The best way to ensure future success is to get involved. Your family, your operation, talk with your elected officials, and make your story known.
I think that's a great question, and I think that's exactly why USCA has a contract lobbyist in Washington, D.C. Our organization does that for one reason, so we can stay abreast of anything coming down the pipeline that might hurt us, and it also is why we have a contract lobbyist there so we can push legislation that helps you, the producer. I think that's huge. We have to realize in all of these scenarios, we've all heard that statement, you can wish in this hand and you know what in this hand, and what do you get? Nothing. And the key to that is you've got to be able to pass legislation. We can stomp our feet, we can be mad at Congress, the three people that are up here before, we can talk to them. They can't move mountains. We still have to be able to pass legislation. So when we work on some of these issues, it's not always what we want. And that's where I'll circle back to the Fisher-Grassley compromise bill. It can get passed. That's huge. We've got to be able to pass it. You can't just go out there and look for that golden egg and be upset about the way Congress does this or doesn't do that. You've got to find a way to get things passed. And those are key issues. And I think USCA has worked hard to find those compromises that we can live with and make meaningful legislation pass. And if we don't do that, if we sit back and just wait for that golden egg to come, that's where we're going to be. We're going to never incite any real change. And so I think that's huge to have our staff out there. It's why USCA has had a member testify at every meaningful hearing in Congress since 2015. We've had one of our members at every one of those congressional hearings, so your voice can be heard, and that's huge. We're such a minority, we've got to make sure our voice continues to be heard. So I think that's why it is important to become members and get involved as ranchers, that you've got to have your voice heard and make sure that you're putting your money behind the organizations that have your best interest, not only your best interest, but the interest that can get passed and that you can move forward so you can get something done. So hopefully that explains why USCA has a full-time lobbyist in Washington, D.C.
In that brochure that I said is in your Vitalix giveaway bags, we have our legislative page. We update this every year, RCAF does, and so the bill numbers are right there, the legislation's right there. We cannot make it clear to cattle producers where RCAF stands on legislation. We give you all the information right there. So just a quick recap of what RCAF supports in the legislative branch of government. We stay true to mandatory country of origin labeling, Senate Bill 2716, the American Beef Labeling Act. Our market is getting unfairly displaced by foreign imports. Have you looked at the USDA data on the imports of live cattle? We import 3 to 4 times more head of live cattle a month than we export. During COVID, we were importing upwards of 200,000 head a month, okay? That is a concern to you and I. That's displacing you and I's market. Senate Bill 949, the 5014 spot market bill, we stay true to. That's under the guidance of our membership. That's what they want us to do. We are not about to push the easy button in Washington and go along with what we think we might be able to get. RCAF is governed by people, not by votes. Okay, we represent cattle producers, and so they are telling us what they have to have in order to get profitable, and that's what we will fight for. A couple other bills on the checkoff that you might want to put on your radar. Mike Lee's Senate Bill 2861, the Opportunities and Fairness in Farming Act, would prohibit any lobbying organization from receiving checkoff funds. If our beef checkoff is truly supposed to be for the promotion and marketing and research of beef, let's get it into the hands of researchers and marketers and out of the hands of lobbying groups. Also, another bill introduced by Senator Mike Lee, the Voluntary Checkoff Participation Act. This would make all checkoffs in all commodities voluntary. The OFF Act also applies to all checkoffs, not just the beef checkoff. And so those are on this legislative page. You may want to take a look. OFF Act, and I think, yeah, the OFF Act is also introduced in the House. So legislative priorities are all right here in black and white.
Karina, you fool me every time and you turn that dang thing off. It's okay. We now give each of you 3 minutes to have wrap-up comments. We'll start with Karina.
You know, something else that's on this legislative plan right here at the top is that Capitol switchboard number, 202-224-3121. I dial it in my sleep. You call the people that you elect every week and you tell them, urge them what you need, what you want, okay? Be polite. Realize that those people answering the phone, they have a wide width that day. They're hearing about a lot of issues, you know, so I always encourage our cattle producers to be polite. But don't expect RCAF, NCBA, or USCA to do all the talking for you. We want you to lobby for yourself. It's honestly one of the things that drew me to RCAF before I was even a member, was them encouraging me to speak for myself and to speak up for our operation. And now that I've got 3 daughters that look me in the eye saying they want a ranch too, now I'm fighting for the next generation as well. And so when I'm at county fairs with them and junior rodeos, you better believe that is on my mind. I do not want our way of life and this crowd getting any smaller. But it's not enough to just have a pretty view anymore. We have got to be able to pay our property taxes and our bills and all the things coming at us. And very few cattle producers are just single income operators anymore. Almost all cattle operations are having to be supplemented by an off-ranch operation. Feeding America is a noble profession, and I don't think it's too much to ask to be able to make a living wage. I don't think any of us are trying to get rich doing this. We're just asking for a fair playing field so that we can continue to do what we're doing and feed the American people. Am I right? I mean, I don't know. I just don't think we're asking too much to reinstate MCOOL and create fair cattle markets.
I think it's safe to say that the 3 organizations that you see setting up before you agree on the general goals of our organization, of our industry. We philosophically disagree on some of the ways that we need to get there. And that isn't unhealthy. It would maybe feel better if we all agreed on everything, but we don't, and that's why we have Democrats and Republicans and libertarians, different philosophies. There's no doubt that our industry faces many challenges, and it's tempting to block out the bad news and focus only on running our farms and ranches. The reality is, like she said, we need to become advocates for our industry. We need to be talking not just to our neighbor down the road, other producers, but we need to be talking with the consumers. And that's why NCBA is focused on reaching new people and explaining the benefits of beef. And I'm really glad to see what Gary Sides had to say, and I wish we can all parrot the message that he brought to us this morning. That's the way that's the path that most safely guarantees our farms and ranches a future, and our future customers the good quality beef. Whether it's recent campaigns to demonstrate the sustainability of beef in places like New York, or the muscle work that resulted in the Flatiron Steak, each program area that NCBA works on behalf of the Beef Checkoff is adding value both directly and indirectly to the investment cattle producers are making through their checkoff dollar. And it helps keep the beef industry in the center of our plate. On the policy front, our doors remain open even when Washington, D.C. closed up in the early days of COVID-19. We kept fighting for policies that would help our producers and keep our businesses open. And I encourage you to visit our website, policy.ncba.org, and keep up to date on what we are doing on a whole range of issues. While we may have policy agreements up here, the best way to make your voice heard is becoming part of the voice. If you don't agree with me, you join RCAF or join U.S. Cattlemen's, but get involved in the process. Our grassroots members drive our policy forward, and we take our direction from our members. Please consider joining us and having a vote in the process.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you guys today. I think it is huge in our industry that we find ways to unite. And again, we're always going to have some differences, but because of we're the small fish out there, we've got to find ways to unite. And if we want to get meaningful things changed, we've got to get together to get some of that done. And it's never always going to be perfect, but I think one of the things we have to remember is that we're all cattlemen. And we said that at the beginning of this, and when we're working and we don't always agree, we need to be cordial. We need to make sure at the end of the day that we're putting forward the right foot. What Gary Sides had to say earlier today, that's the challenges facing every one of us. The narrative is against us, and we've got to make sure that we change that narrative. I think you've started, all of you, but being here, you've got to get involved. Anytime I get to talk, I say it is imperative that you get involved. And I don't care if it's at the school board level, the county level, or at any one of these cattle organizations. If you want your way of life to continue, then we're going to have to get involved, and we're going to have to work hard to do that. There is some huge things coming down the road. We lose 20% of our rural farmers and ranchers every 10 years. That's a trend we've got to stop, or we're not going to be out here and we're not going to be sustainable and viable. And I think we have some great possibilities as we work forward. U.S. Cattlemen's going to continue to bring that fight to not only Washington, but to each and every grassroots person, and we hope you'll stop by our booth. Leah Biondo's here yet today with us. We have a booth out there in the hall that you'll come by and visit with us. I would love to field questions. I'm sure lots of you have them, but time and the bankers don't let us do all that, so you'll have to come by our booth, and we'd be glad to answer any questions or talk more about these issues. So I think you all deserve a round of applause for being here today, and we appreciate you taking the time and the interest to forward the cattlemen's groups. And that's what each and every one of you are, and I hope we remember that as we go out there and we work to provide change and bring our industry forward. So thank you.